back to Lord of the Flies, and you know what? I did this again last week. I called him William Goldman. It's William Golding. I always get the the screenwriter who wrote The Princess Bride confused with um, the author of Lord of the Flies confused for some reason. Um, William Golding. We were just talking about veterans who were disenchanted and came home with some revolutionary ideas. And this author is a classic example of that. He grew up reading a book. Uh, what was it called? The Coral Island. It was written by a Scottish writer in the mid 1800s, and it was uh, kind of a harmless sort of Treasure Island, not Treasure Island style, but almost a book about three little boys who end up in a desert island and
Swiss Family Robinson style kind of.
exactly, and all the Polynesian characters are savages, and it's a sort of uplifting story about little British boys in the middle of at the heyday of British imperialism, and he was raised on that book, loved it. Then William Golding became a British Navy officer who, at D-Day in Normandy, commanded a boat that fired rockets into the German occupied territories. And he came back deeply disenchanted and with a different perspective on humanity. I found this quote from him. I began to see what people were capable of doing. Anyone who moved through those years without understanding that man produces evil as a bee produces honey must have been blind or wrong in the head. And he was sitting with his wife one night in front of the fire, and he was inspired to write a book based on two images in his head. And apparently this is a quote from him. One is the picture of a little boy who discovers that he is actually on a coral island, and he's so delighted that he stands on his head. The other was the same little boy crying his heart out because he discovered what was inside people and what could come out of them. So that seems like a good setup for what.
He'd also become a school teacher on his return. So he knew boys of this age and what they were capable of and what lurked within.
Right. So I don't know, Walter. Do you think that as a setup, it ties in so neatly with what we were just talking about? But I think this book, there's a moment in the beginning where let's see if I can find it, where the Ralph character, who's sort of the blonde,
the quarterback.
He's the quarterback. He's the the chief of the homecoming king, right? And he comes back and he gives an announcement. And there's this passage. Ralph pushed back the tangle of fair hair that hung on his forehead. So we may be here a long time. This is that he's addressing the assembled kids.
Right.
Nobody said anything. He grinned suddenly. But this is a good island. We, Jack, Simon, and me, we climbed the mountain. It's wizard. There's food and drink and rocks. And somebody else chimes in, blue flowers. And then there's some other stuff. And he says, while we're waiting, we can have a good time on this island. And it's like in a book, Treasure Island, swallows and Amazons, Coral Island. Ralph waved the conch. This is our island. It's a good island. Until the grown-ups come to fetch us, we'll have fun. And that's the setup. That's the moment. I think everything kind of starts to go downhill from that moment. But it's the naive belief that while they're waiting to be rescued, that they can just enjoy their little Swiss Family Robinson adventures. It starts to disappear pretty quickly.
It's a Garden of Eden story, but without Eve. You know,
Right. Yes, exactly.
without a woman to blame it on. Um, where the original sin comes from uh, male, boyish uh, ways and thoughts. And essentially, what happens after Ralph has gathered all these children. They went down in a plane crash. It's a little murky as to how they all got there. I don't quite get it. If there was more than one plane crash or whatever, but
Yeah, no, they don't explain it. They conspicuously don't explain it.
yeah, they don't explain it. But what Ralph is essentially in charge of is a huge group of like 6 or 7 year olds. He's got a few, adolescent or early adolescent,
Like 12-year-olds. Yeah.
peers, but he's basically in charge of 6 and 7 year olds who can't really take care of themselves and who need leadership, require uh, uh, guidance and so on. And it's a bit of a noble experiment at first, to think, yeah, we're going to have fun and we're also going to, we're going to have a signal fire that, alerts rescuers. We're going to gather food. We're going to enjoy ourselves. This is a little interlude without grown-ups, remember? And they're pretty excited about it. It's Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Right. Yeah. What's the other one with Tom Cruise?
Risky Business.
Risky Business. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All Lord of the Flies ripoffs,
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All those teen comedies were, with the parents away. And so you kind of, as a guy, you have a sort of enthusiasm, optimism for this whole experiment, and their unshakable faith that the grown-ups will come back it is also interesting.
Right.
It's almost religious in the sense, and I won't get to it, but I actually think that's a flaw in the book.
Really?
I think the book cops out by having the grown-ups come back.
Because it averts the inevitable massacre at the end or something like that.
Yeah, it's a deus ex machina in the language of old Greek drama.
Right.
A god comes down and prevents things from going even more awry than they already have. But
Right.
It's much more terrifying to think that the grown-ups don't come back, and what the society you make, you teenage boys, starting to paint your faces and revert to sort of primitive hunting gangs and clans, is going to be the one you're going to have to live with. It. But Goldman, I don't know, for some reason. Golding. Yeah. Dude, not only did I get the Goldman, Adventures in the Skin Trade or in the film trade or whatever he called his book about screenwriting. Not only do I get him mixed up with Golding, I used to get Lord of the Flies mixed up with Catcher in the Rye.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Like, I thought they were kind of the same book, or they had the same message, or the teachers spoke about them in the same way, or they were in the same piles in the corner of the English class. And they are both similar in the sense that they, they're about adolescent males.
Well, they're about phonies. It's about lies. It's about lying to kids.
Yeah.
Specifically.
Lying to kids.
Right. And, well, I noticed something in rereading that I never caught before. You mentioned Siegfried Sassoon and Wilfred Owen before. One of my favorite poems, I'm sure it's one of your favorites, is Dulce et Decorum Est, right?
Yeah.
It's one of the great poems of all time. And for those who haven't read it, it's a poem that begins with, well, we'll talk about how it begins in a moment, but it's about somebody who's been gassed, a soldier who's been gassed, and he's in a wagon, and the author is talking about this, and it ends like this. It says, "If in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in, and watch the white eyes writhing in his hanging face like a devil sick of sin, if you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cud of vile incurable sores on innocent tongues, my friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, dulce et decorum est pro patria mori." So the poem is about lying to kids, right? Because kids grow up with this idea that dying, it is sweet. The Latin is, it is sweet and decorous to die for your country. And it's a lie. That story starts, the first line of that poem goes like this: "Bent double like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we curse through sludge." If you read chapter 3, it says, "Jack was bent double. He was down like a sprinter, his nose only a few inches from the humid earth." I've never in my life written the phrase "bent double" before.
Right.
You wouldn't do it by accident. And I think it has to be a reference to this because this is also a story about children believing a lie.
Yes.
And this is by an author who was similarly like Wilfred Owen, who was seduced by the same lie. I think for Britons in the 1940s, it was a little different because they were imminently under threat of being invaded, but still, right? The idea that there's something beautiful and honorable about it is pretty hard to reconcile when you've seen it up close. And clearly it bothered him to the end of his days, and this is in this book. And so these characters, they go from seeing it as a good island, and right away one of the kids starts talking about how it's not a good island. In fact, there is a beastie
Right.
in the weeds, right? And so this gets to your Garden of Eden thing. One of the kids, this little kid, says, Piggy says he wants to know what you're going to, says to Ralph, he wants to know what you're going to do about the snake thing. Ralph laughed, and the other boys laughed with him. The small boy twisted further into himself. "Tell us about the snake thing." Now he says it was a beastie. Beastie? A snake thing, ever so big. He saw it. Where? In the woods. So the Garden of Eden now has a serpent in it.
Right.
And there's some confusion. Ralph they settle on sort of an official BBC-style government position that there is no snake in the island. There is no beastie, and that is what they are all going to believe. But if they see it, we'll kill it. It won't be a problem.
Right. Which actually, in the scheme of things, and given what we learn, is a pretty rational and enlightened position. We're not going to be seized by paranoia. We're not going to be goaded into scapegoating and fear-based social organization. And they try to hold off. Ralph is actually a very enlightened leader in some ways, though we start out going, oh, he's the fair-haired boy with all the, who looks good with his shirt off compared to Piggy. Piggy is in a way the nerd reader's surrogate. He has glasses, he's overweight, he has asthma.
He's bullied.
He's bullied. His parents are gone. But Ralph makes this attempt to be the traditional British leader. We're all gonna all for one and one for all. It's not going to be terrible. Everything is going to work out. Authority will be reestablished. In the meantime, we have to make do. and so on. But the rival faction that is starting to gather strength in the book is based on fear, tribal vendetta, and a kind of primitive Nietzschean, Rousseauian, let's say, savagery. Not Rousseauian. Rousseau thought people in their savage or natural state were actually very good, kind, altruistic people. Maybe
Hobbesian, maybe, yeah.
Hobbesian, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
People nasty, brutish, and short in the state of nature. World is a jungle. The war of all against all, and it's a competition between sort of rational hope and irrational fear.
Yeah, and the story doesn't have to go this way. It could have been written as a survival story where they succeed in the end. It could have been Robinson Crusoe, which explores both themes, but ultimately is a uplifting story of survival and friendship and some other things. Another great book about there's a lot of books about islands that are great. Gulliver's Travels and the British canon, but
Shakespeare's The Tempest.
Obviously,
Britain, remember, was an empire. It is itself an island, or a collection of them. Great Britain, or the United Kingdom. So the examination of island psychology was always a feature of their literature. I think Sir Thomas More's Utopia, back when,
totally,
in the Renaissance, was set on an island too.
Mm-hmm.
Americans, with the whole continent to ourselves, don't think in island terms, microcosm terms. Even Aldous Huxley wrote a kind of a comeback to his earlier dystopian fiction. What was it called? I can't remember. But it was also set on an island where Huxley, after having bummed people out for most of his life, felt that he should show the ideal society and free love and sharing and and so on. But islands as social experiments, islands as allegorical sites on which you can sort of play out as if in a literary lab, the development of societies is a big thing there. And this was as pessimistic. I think in that tradition, which over there is, as I say, goes way back and is rich and full, this was the most cynical or
pessimistic. Yeah, exactly. So it's a dark spoof of the Coral Island, basically, right? And again, it doesn't have to be that way. I'm not sure that I don't feel a little bit like the premise of this book is flawed. That there's a little bit of
like he forced it. You mean?
Yeah, the idea that there's an inevitability to the collapse of society, and that he is trying to say something about how we're less civilized than we think we are, which is absolutely true. And maybe in that moment, it probably resonated more with young men or middle-aged men than it would to folks like us who haven't been through that sort of thing. But his kids end up turning on each other in ways. Well, I guess it is inevitable, right? There aren't really false notes in the story. They just, as it progresses, they separate into different factions, and one faction just gains a hold. And it's a little bit like the Yeats poem that we always refer to, that, right? you know, turning in the widening gyre, right? The center cannot hold in this story.
The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. And it is the passions that take over in this book. So, unlike a lot of the other dystopian fiction, which is about a scientific, technocratic sort of or party elite that comes in and forces all reality into their boxes and their sets of definitions. This is a story about the primitive asserting itself, and not the technocrat, not the scientist, not the party, ideologue. And in that sense, I think he felt it was inevitable because he thought that the human heart was divided essentially between hope and fear, between what they say on Wall Street, greed and fear are the two emotional pillars that move the market. And it's a book that I think we can look at anew and question whether it's that inevitable. Maybe because the one thing that may limit it for a modern audience is the idea that people can fall back into primitivism. This quote, we're so deracinated. We're so far from that original self. These British schoolboys become hunters in a, drop of a hat. I'm not sure the TikTokers would be able to become hunting tribes with that.
Right. There are two things you can count on British schoolboys to be able to do right away, which is hunt and wear women's clothes, right? like Monty Python. But yes, and there are some things also in the story that that hasten the decline of the of the civilization on the island. Like, for instance, you just mentioned that it was a very reasonable position for them to say, if there are no snakes, but if there are, we'll deal with it, right? Well, they move away from that pretty quickly. There's a scene where Jack and this other character Simon, they're sitting around late at night and they're talking about the little ones, the kids who are increasingly freaked out, and they're having a tough time stifling their fears. And Jack shakes his head and he says, they talk and scream, the little ones, even some of the others, as if it wasn't a good island, Simon says. Astonished at the interruption, they looked up at Simon's serious face. As if, said Simon, the beastie or the snake thing was real. And after this point, the snakes become kind of unmentionable, right? Like the older boys kind of decree it that way, and that makes the fear double and triple, right? And I think accelerates the decline of the whole situation.
Right. I mean, it's also unclear whether Ralph's counterpart or nemesis, Jack, is doing what he's doing cynically as a power acquisition strategy, or whether the fears and so on are organic and essential to the situation. In other words, it seems like the other leader, Jack, is a true opportunist, something of a psychopath, really, willing to use whatever negative emotions he can stir, exaggerate, emphasize for his own power. And watching that watching that consciousness of sort of dictatorial power and influence rise in the heart of a child is really quite terrifying. I mean,
yeah. And once you get to about chapter 4 in this book, which is called Painted Faces and Long Hair. You see they begin. Jack begins to move everybody towards this kind of primitive religion, of fear, and I think it's similar to stories we talked about before, where we're trying to explain how something like the Nazi movement happens, right? You take a bunch of good people, superficially good people, but this is inside all of us, and how does it happen? And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I think that's where he's going with this. Is he's trying to explain the evil that he saw in the war, and so there's a pessimistic view of things that maybe was emphasized a great deal because at the time it was not a popular view in England, right?
Think about those soldiers who came back from World War II to England and the United States. They were absolutely feted in a way that has never happened since. They were given parades and, photographed kissing young women and, sort of reconquering the homeland with their goodness and their virtue. Johnny comes marching home. But on the real level, as human beings, they had almost all seen or participated or been exposed to stuff that didn't fit with ticker tape parades, didn't fit with, things that are usually celebrated. So they had this weird juxtaposition of private experience, private knowledge, with an almost social obligation to celebrate victory in a just war, and what a double bind that is for the human being.
And this is a way to cope. I think this book,
yes.
But he's making a point about how if you don't stay on top of it, the fear, the panic, the aggression, especially in an all male environment. As you point out, this is Eden without women, and that has to be. It's not just because Coral Island was written that way. It's because that's what the war was for most of these guys. It was so.
And you know what I find this book oddly predictive of is how the Vietnam War turned out for the American GI. From the Deer Hunter to Apocalypse Now,
yeah,
etc. We basically see stories of the American GI who goes over somewhat disciplined in a World War II like military context, and then becomes feral. Freaking tying, tying headbands, smoking dope, becoming grandiose and tribal, and also, sort of almost identifying with
First Blood. He's unfit for society when he comes back, right?
Dude, I just watched it for the first time last week.
Oh my God, great movie, right?
A great movie.
I didn't expect it, frankly. Yeah.
So much to talk about, but and Stallone, I've got to say, my esteem for him as an actor and a figure goes up every year. Like, wait a second, Rocky, First Blood, what was the other franchise he was involved in? I can't remember.
I can't even remember. Well, he's doing Tulsa King now, but
right.
Yeah, Rocky, that was a true story. But he understood. I think he went to that fight. The Bayonne Bleeder. He's from right around here. The Chuck Wepner Ali fight, and which is and then Rocky was based on that thing, and he saw that it was a real life story of perseverance, and how even somebody who's nobody can be can have a moment of glory, right? That lasts forever. And it was a beautiful story for an actor to write, And First Blood, I think that was what was interesting about First Blood compared to the other Vietnam movies is that it was popularized in a way that the other ones could not be. Like, in other words, this was it was a great action movie that reached people of all classes, but it told a kind of a true story about, I mean, the idea that the whole world was against every Vietnam veteran who came home, that's a little exaggerated, but there was something. What we're talking about here is that when you go to that experience and you come back and you're not quite fit for civilization anymore, that's, I think he nailed that.
The book I've been finishing forever, and I'm just this many hours from finishing now, includes, it's a road trip around America, and includes a lot of togetherness with a PTSD afflicted Afghanistan vet.
Mm.
And one of the things we both know, I mean, one of the things he told me along the way, he said, war, the Great War on Terror, doesn't equip you to come back and live an American life, but it really equips you to be homeless.
Mm.
And that's kind of the story of First Blood. And
totally,
he's come back as an absolutely perfectly equipped homeless drifter. And but the bourgeois little small town orderly society doesn't want drifters anymore,
Right. Right.
But we're back to Golding. We are dealing again with, I think, this very conflicted attempt to work out the contradictions learned in war and the hard lessons about the atavism, the atavistic nature of human beings, how fast they can regress, and how, in a weird way, we're built to regress. That's where we came from. We want to go back almost.
Right.
Why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't we want to go back to a world of hunting?
Hunting pigs like Rambo did, by the way.
Yeah. Fires, war, and so on. I mean, Cormac McCarthy, in his way, had the same theme, that the essential human activity is war. And we're drawn back to it, fatally and perennially and tragically. But in this story, we're allowed to see it in a way that is a little less scary because it's schoolboys on an island. And I think that it's laid in pretty quickly that they probably are going to be rescued at some point from themselves.
Yeah, it's Gilligan's Island, but everything goes wrong and they're kids. Right? But yeah,
Gilligan's Island.
Dude,
you just opened up a world of imagery, though. Like, how can I put it? Ginger, like Salome coming in, like dancing for the gang lord, kill the beast.
Right.
That would, and Gilligan, reverting, kill the skipper. We don't need this professor slowing us down with his theories.
That's right. Yeah, the professor is sort of like Ralph, but Ralph mixed with, I don't know. No, he's Ralph basically. But at the middle of the book, before we get the mysterious appearance of adults, as you say, they're going back to nature. They become feral. They're having chanting, and they suddenly decide they want to paint themselves in the colors that they see around them. If only we had some green, right? And this is the beginning of what turns out to be a descent into savagery, but you don't see it that way. in the middle of the book, but it goes that way. So that's kind of where we are at the middle of the book. Is that these kids, especially the little ones, are kind of leading. It's the tail is wagging the dog here. The leaders are taking advantage, or one of them anyway is taking advantage of the feral urges of these feral kids.
Yeah. So one intellectual history note: this book's written, early 1950s. It had been about 100 years since Western society had been floored by Charles Darwin and the theory of evolution and the thought we came from apes or ape-like creatures. Our roots are not in some, sort of religious past of learning and getting better and so on. We're only recently crawled out of the mud, we only recently stopped beating each other with sticks and so on. I think society was still absorbing that shock to its system, to think that we've only been civilized for such a short time, and what we were civilized from is so absolutely, primal and primeval. Can we hope to keep this thing going? I think that was a real question, and maybe still is. Can we keep this civilization thing going when we're descended from apes and are only recently learned to read and things like that?
Yeah, Vonnegut played around with that in his book Galapagos, believe it or not, right? I think he was playing with some of those same themes. I think his last great book, but yeah, you're absolutely right. And the fact that it's on an island, a small island, this book is not an accident. So when we come back, I think our next segment will be kind of about the visitor and what happens, what unfolds, but basically
and how Jack in a weird way parlays these fears intuitively or deliberately. He is the dark side leader who doesn't look to what his people want or hope for, but what they fear and what can animate them at the most passionate and primal level.
Could be a comment on some of our current leaders, but anyway,
sure.
We'll that was fun to talk about. Hope your headache improves, and
thanks,
we'll talk.